Hey, this is Jessie V. So a few months back I did that video talking about 50 things that you didn't know about me. In that video I mentioned that I had a few lung surgeries. So over the past few weeks I've had so many messages telling me to do a video about these lung surgeries. So I thought, why not? I'm just gonna do it. So I had a collapsed lung. The medical term for a collapsed lung is pneumothorax. It basically occurs when air leaks between your lungs and your chest wall, causing it to collapse. So there's a few different ways for your lung to collapse. What happened with me is my lungs were too big for my rib cage. So as I was growing up, my lungs started rubbing against my ribcage every single time I breathed. So eventually it came to the point where my lung just couldn't hold on to the top of my chest wall anymore and it just collapsed. I was in grade 11 when it happened and it was a pretty terrible experience. So I'm going to try to tell the story as best as I can. I was on morphine for most of the time I was in the hospital, so some parts are kind of blurry, but I will try my best. I'm not looking for sympathy. What happened happened. It's in my past, but I thought I would share it because I've gotten so many messages too. So it started in October of my grade 11 year. I was having slight back pain, which I just dismissed as being muscle pain because you don't automatically think when your back hurts that your lung collapsed, right? So I just dismissed it as being nothing. Because my lung collapsed pretty slowly, so it started off just being slight pain. And that's what I was experiencing and thought was muscle pain. At the time this pain was happening, my family was going through a lot. We found out that my great-grandpa had cancer, so the family was really concentrating on him because he didn't have a long time to live. So my mom wasn't going to work, she was spending all her time with him, and it was just a really sad time. My back pain eventually got worse. I remember every single time I walked up the steps to go to my room, every step that I took, I got this like shooting pain in my back. My lung was collapsing without me even realizing it. It's so weird to think about now. So like a week or two before my grandfather passed away, he wasn't able to leave his bed anymore because the cancer was so bad. It made him really weak. So I knew he loved music and I thought, okay, I'll give him my old MP3 player and I'll put some music on it for him. And a lot of it was classical music, you know, piano melodies and stuff like that. And there was this one song called The Meadow. It was a song that I played on my piano all the time, so I thought that he would enjoy it. I remember the day he passed away, I got a phone call while I was playing The Meadow on my piano, thinking about him. And my Nana called me and told me that he had passed. And I remember feeling so sad that I collapsed on the ground and started crying. And every time I took a breath in, it felt like someone was stabbing me in the side. Like I couldn't, you know when you're crying really hard, you have to take those deep breaths in. I couldn't do it. It was like there was something blocking me from breathing in and it just felt like this horrible, horrible pain, but I couldn't stop crying because I was so sad. And that probably made my lung like deteriorate even more. 2 days before his funeral, I remember sitting by my fireplace, just really upset, and I sneezed, and I can remember this exact sneeze because it was like my whole body just like convulsed, and my lung, I didn't know it was my lung at the time. I thought it was my muscles. I don't know why. I was in denial. I didn't even know what a lung collapse was. I didn't know. But I remember that sneeze was the worst pain I had ever felt. So I got really, really scared. I was like, what is going on with my body? So I ran up to my parents' room and I told them about this horrible pain. And they said, listen, Jess, it's probably just muscle pain. There's nothing wrong. It's muscle pain. But I kept complaining. I was like, no, Mom, Dad, it's really, really horrible. I don't think it's muscle pain. So they told me they'd take me to the doctor. So that's what we did the next day. Before we left for the doctors, I typed all of the symptoms I was feeling in Google. You know, like when you do that just to see if you have any like weird disease or issue, you type in your symptoms that you're having and then you get scared because you see all these weird things. Well, the exact symptoms that I typed into Google brought up pneumothorax, you know, a collapsed lung. And I got really scared. I'm like, oh my gosh, what if my lung is collapsed? Because I remember reading on, it was like one of these doctors' websites. It said fatal if not treated immediately. So here are some of the symptoms that I was experiencing, just in case, you know, maybe one of you guys ever have it. Sudden chest pain and shortness of breath. The pain is so sharp that it could feel like there's tightness in your chest. So like you can't fully take a breath in. A rapid heart rate, rapid breathing, coughing and tiredness, and I had a lot of pain in my back. So I went to the doctor and he told me it was muscle pain. He was like, listen Jess, you're fine, it's probably just muscle pain. And I got so angry. I was like, I think I would know if it was just a small amount of muscle pain. It felt like it was definitely something in my lungs. So he was like, okay Jess, you know what? You can get x-rays done and some blood work done so we can just make sure. And I felt calm because of that, because they would they're doctors, they can look at it and tell me if there's something wrong. So I remember getting my x-ray taken, and they made me like hold my hands in the air and press my chest against the x-ray machine. It was so cold. And then I got my blood work done, and the doctor told me that I would know the next day. They would call me about my results. So I went home and prepared for the funeral for the next day. The day of the funeral was really sad, obviously. It was the first person that was close to me that had died, so it was really hard, especially seeing my mom and my nana and just everyone crying and sad. I remember everyone telling me that I looked really pale, and I know now it was because I was barely breathing. My sister sang Amazing Grace as my grandfather's coffin was being put into the ground. Then we headed home. I couldn't even cry because it hurt so much. Like physically, I couldn't. When we got home, there was a message on the phone from my doctor, and I can remember this so well. The doctor sounded extremely worried. He was talking really fast. He said in the message that the x-ray showed that my lung had collapsed and I had to go to the hospital immediately. So my parents and I got into the car and we rushed over to emergency. It felt like forever waiting in the emergency room, but when I was finally called in, a doctor sat me down. He took out a pen and paper and drew me a picture of what my collapsed lung looked like. So he drew a picture of a chest, and then he drew a picture of a full left lung, and then he drew my right lung, which had obviously collapsed. It was like this little like lung that was like shriveled up in the chest. It didn't even look like I had a lung anymore. He then told me that I'd have to have a surgery where they would cut a small hole in my side, and they would insert a tube into it to release the air from my lung. So what's supposed to happen is when that tube goes into my lung, it would release all of the air that made my lung collapse so the lung could reinflate. I would have to have the tube in my lung for about 2-3 days to give my lung the time to reinflate. So I'd have to sleep on my side where the tube wasn't, and I couldn't move very much. So after he explained all this, I went to the surgery. They put an IV in my arm, put me to sleep. I woke up with all these tubes in my nose helping me breathe. I remember trying to breathe and something just felt really wrong. Felt like my chest wasn't rising and that the tube they had just put in was making me breathe less than I had before. Apparently this is a normal feeling though, because obviously there's an object like in your lung, you're obviously going to feel weird about it. I remember having an anxiety attack and all the nurses had to try and calm me down. I was throwing up. It was not fun. So I went home that night. It was so weird because I didn't think that I'd even be allowed to go home with some weird tube sticking out of my side. Like literally it was going into my lung and out of the side of my chest. Like it was, the tube like hung like all the way down to like my hips. It was just there. But I was hopeful because the surgeon told me that it's 90% effective. Usually the lung would reinflate from the tube. So those 2 days that I had the chest tube in went by really slowly because I could barely move. I didn't want the tube to come out. My parents were looking over me the whole time. So I finally went back to that surgeon so he can check if my lung had reinflated. I remember thinking that nothing had really felt different since I had the tube. I still felt like I could barely breathe. Like it didn't feel like it helped at all. But I kind of passed it off as, well, maybe it's just the weird feeling of the tube in my chest. Maybe once they take it out, I'll feel normal again. So when I got to see the surgeon, he gave me a series of tests to see if my lung had expanded. One of the tests was the surgeon took this cup of water and he put the tube that was coming out of my side into it. And he said, I want you to breathe out really hard. And if the cup bubbles, so if the tube made the cup bubble, my lung had not reinflated. And if there was no bubbles in the cup, it was fine. We could take the tube out, I can go home, live my life, everything's fine. Well, of course, the cup bubbled, which meant that my lung was still collapsed. I remember getting so dizzy hearing that news that I passed out, woke up on a table, and I remember just as I was waking up, I could hear the surgeon talking to my parents about how I would have to have another surgery. He said that this surgery was for really severe collapsed lungs, and that most people don't have to do it because their lung reinflates with the tube, which didn't happen to me, so just my luck, right? So what this second surgery was, they would have to go into my lung and cut an inch off the top of it. So they would literally have to take an inch of my lung out of my chest, and then they would reattach the lung to the top of my chest wall. Then they would have to insert this really large tube into the bottom of my lung, so it's another incision. The tube was pretty big. It was like an inch in circumference, and that tube at the bottom of my lung would have to drain the blood, the excess fluid, the remainders of the surgery basically, because they're doing the surgery at the top of my lung, all of that stuff falls to the bottom, right? So this tube basically takes out all of that stuff into this plastic like bin thing that was clear, so I remember just seeing all of the gunk from like inside my lung falling into that bucket. So I went back to the hospital, getting ready to do this surgery. I couldn't eat for like 24 hours or drink, so I remember being really hungry. I was on morphine because of the pain, so everything was like kind of blurry. I remember my dad, we had this like small television in front of my bed, and my dad found this DVD beside it, and it was New York Minute. It was that movie with Mary-Kate and Ashley, and he put that on and I watched that. When it was time to bring me into surgery, I remember being like really late, like 1 o'clock in the morning or 2 in the morning, because everything was dark outside. They were bringing me down this like white hallway, preparing me for surgery, and I got so scared because just hearing the way the surgery was gonna go and like all these tubes and incisions and cutting off the top of my lung, I had a huge panic attack, so much so they couldn't calm me down, so they had to give me a tranquilizer. And that just like completely knocked me out. So then the surgery took place, and when I woke up, obviously I felt a lot of pain, but I was able to breathe in a lot better. So I knew that they had fixed up my lung, but there was a lot of waiting to do for it to heal. I remember just feeling that huge tube at the bottom of my lung just sticking in. It felt really disgusting. When I looked to the side of my bed, I saw that bin with all the fluid going into it. So I spent a lot of time in the hospital. Family was visiting me. I remember when it was time for me to go home, they had to remove that big tube at the bottom of my lung. And I was awake when they did it. It was gross. I could feel like every single movement of that tube coming out of my lung. That pain was just unbearable. And then obviously I had stitches all over me that I had to keep in for a while. So then the doctor explained to me that because my left lung was still too big for my rib cage, there's a 40% chance that in the future that lung might collapse. It hasn't yet. I have been good ever since grade 11. I'm hoping that it doesn't. Apparently there's a high, obviously 40% is a pretty high chance that it will collapse. But I don't live my life in fear. I don't want to worry about that all the time. I can't do a lot of activities that most people can do, especially at really high altitudes. So I can't go climb mountains or, go skydiving or any of that stuff. And also like at really low depth, so I can't go scuba diving, like nothing that would put pressure on my lung to make it collapse, basically. So that is the short version of what happened to me. It was definitely a scary time. I remember after getting home from the hospital, I stepped on the scale and I was 80 pounds. I was so skinny, so unhealthy, so sick. So I mean, just think about it, like grade 11, 80 pounds. So I was like 17, 80 pounds. Like, it's disgusting. Anyways, I hope this never happens to you guys. If it has happened before, feel free to just talk about your experience in the comments. It'd be interesting to hear what you went through as well. Don't do what I did. If you're experiencing really bad pain, go to the doctor right away. I dismissed it as muscle pain, which was the worst thing I could do, because I made my lung collapse even more and I didn't get medical treatment when I should have. So always think about your body, think about what's healthy, what's good for you, and take care of yourself. I hope you guys have a really awesome day. Please like and share this video. It just supports me greatly. Subscribe. You guys are the best. Anyways, until next time, bye guys.